The cardboard box slipped from my hands, crashing onto the hardwood floor with a thud that echoed through the empty apartment. My heart stopped not because of the noise, but because of her eyes. Riley stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the late afternoon light, and for the first time in years, I saw something in her gaze that made my world tilt. She was looking at me like I was the only thing left in the room. We'd been friends since college, inseparable through late-night study sessions and bad breakups, but this was different. Riley had called me 2 weeks ago, her voice shaky over the phone, asking if I could help her move out of her Brooklyn apartment. "It's just a lot, Emma," she'd said, and I could hear the weight of something unspoken. I didn't hesitate to say yes. I never could say no to her. Now, standing in her half-packed living room, surrounded by boxes labeled kitchen and books, I felt the air between us crackle with something new, something dangerous. Riley was always the bold one, the girl who'd drag me to dive bars or convince me to dance in the rain during a thunderstorm. At 26, she still had that spark, her long, wavy black hair falling over her shoulders, her dark eyes sharp with wit but soft with something else today. I was the quieter one, 25, with my short, messy brown hair and a tendency to overthink everything. I'd spent years burying my feelings for her, convincing myself they were just a phase, a flicker of admiration for my best friend. But now, as she stepped closer, her flannel sleeve brushing against mine, I wasn't so sure. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My hands fumbled with the tape on a box, anything to avoid her gaze. "Like what?" Riley's tone was teasing, but her eyes were serious, searching mine. She took a step closer, and the space between us felt like it was shrinking, pulling me into a gravity I couldn't escape. "Like I don't know. Like you're about to say something crazy." I tried to laugh, but it came out shaky. My heart was pounding so loud I swore she could hear it. She didn't laugh. Instead, she reached out, her fingers grazing my wrist, and I froze. "Emma," she said softly, "what if I am?" The room felt too small, the air too thick. I'd come here to help her move, to pack up her life and say goodbye to this apartment she'd called home for 3 years. But now, standing here, I realized I wasn't ready to let her go, not this apartment, not her, not whatever this moment was threatening to become. Riley's apartment was a snapshot of her life, mismatched furniture, a coffee table covered in candle wax, and a bookshelf overflowing with dog-eared novels. We'd spent countless nights here, laughing over cheap wine or crying over her last breakup with that jerk, Matt. I'd always been the one to pick up the pieces, to remind her she deserved better. But now, as she looked at me with an intensity I'd never seen before, I wondered if I'd been blind to what was right in front of me. I need to tell you something," she said, her voice low, almost urgent. She stepped even closer, her hand still lingering on my wrist. "But I'm scared it's gonna mess everything up." My stomach twisted. "Riley, you're freaking me out. Just say it." I tried to sound casual, but my voice betrayed me, trembling with the weight of anticipation. She opened her mouth, then hesitated, her eyes flickering to the floor. For a moment, I thought she'd back out, change the subject like she always did when things got too heavy. But then she looked up, and her gaze locked onto mine with a fierceness that made my breath catch. "I don't want to move away from you," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought I could do this, pack up, start over somewhere new, but I can't. Not without you." The words hit me like a punch. I stared at her, my mind racing to catch up. Was she saying what I thought she was? Or was I reading too much into it, letting my buried feelings cloud my judgment? I'd spent so long convincing myself that Riley was just a friend, that my heart didn't skip every time she smiled at me. But now, with her standing so close, her hand warm against my skin, I couldn't deny the truth anymore. "Riley, what are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely audible. I needed her to spell it out, to make it real. She took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving mine. "I'm saying I've been an idiot. I've been running from us for years. And I'm done running." My heart stopped. The room, The boxes, the chaos of the move, it all faded away. There was only Riley, her words hanging between us like a fragile thread. I wanted to reach out, to pull her closer, but fear held me back. What if this was a mistake? What if I was about to ruin the best friendship I'd ever had? She said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. Say something. Please. I opened my mouth, but no words came. My mind was a storm of emotions, fear, hope, longing, all colliding at once. I'd come here to help her move, to pack up her life and send her off to a new chapter. But now, standing in the wreckage of her apartment, I realized I might be the one about to start something new. I stood frozen, Riley's words echoing in my head like a song I'd heard 1,000 times, but never understood until now. Her hand was still on my wrist, her touch grounding me even as my thoughts spun out of control. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat felt tight, like the weight of years of unspoken feelings had lodged there. Riley, I finally managed, my voice cracking. You can't just say that and expect me to know what to do. My eyes darted to the floor, to the scattered packing tape and crumpled newspaper, anywhere but her face. I was terrified of what I'd see there, hope, rejection, or something even scarier. She let out a shaky laugh, her fingers tightening slightly on my wrist. I know. I'm sorry. I couldn't keep it in anymore. She stepped closer, and I could smell the faint citrus of her shampoo, a scent that had always felt like home. Emma, I've been thinking about this for months. Maybe longer. I just didn't know how to say it. I forced myself to look up, and her eyes were raw, unguarded. Riley, who could charm a room full of strangers or talk her way out of anything, was standing here, vulnerable, waiting for me to respond. It was surreal, like stepping into a dream I'd never admitted to having. Months? I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. Why didn't you say anything before? Because I was scared, she admitted, her voice trembling. Scared of losing you. Scared you wouldn't feel the same. Scared I'd ruin everything we have. She paused, her eyes searching mine. But when I got the job offer in Chicago, it hit me. I can't imagine my life without you in it, Em. Not as just a friend. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Chicago. She was moving to Chicago. The realization hit me like a cold wave, pulling me back to reality. That's why we were here, packing up her life, preparing for her to leave New York, leave me. I'd been trying not to think about it, focusing on the task of taping boxes and labeling them with her neat handwriting. But now, her confession was tearing that denial apart. Riley, you're leaving, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. You're moving halfway across the country, and now you're telling me this? I pulled my wrist from her grasp, stepping back, needing space to breathe. The room felt too small, the air too heavy with the weight of her words. I know, she said quickly, her hands raised as if to stop me from retreating further. I know it's terrible timing. But I couldn't let you help me pack up my entire life and walk away without telling you how I feel. I'd regret it forever. I stared at her, my mind a tangle of emotions. Part of me wanted to run, out of the apartment, away from this moment that threatened to change everything. But another part, the part that had spent years memorizing the way her laugh lit up a room, wanted to stay, to lean into this terrifying possibility. What do you want me to say? I asked, my voice breaking. That I've felt the same way? That I've been in love with you since we were 19, sitting on your dorm room floor eating pizza at 2 a.m. The words spilled out before I could stop them, raw and unfiltered. I clapped a hand over my mouth, horrified, but it was too late. Riley's eyes widened, a flicker of hope breaking through the fear. You mean that? She asked, her voice barely audible. I turned away, my cheeks burning. I hadn't meant to say it, not like that, not now. But the truth was out, and there was no taking it back. I'd been in love with Riley for years, burying it under layers of friendship, convincing myself it was one-sided, impossible. And now she was standing here, saying she felt the same, just as she was about to leave. Emma, she said softly, stepping closer again. Look at me. Please. I shook my head, staring at a box labeled miscellaneous as if it held the answers to this mess. I can't, I whispered. This is too much. You're leaving, Riley. What are we supposed to do with this? I don't know, she admitted, her voice raw. But I know I can't leave without trying. Without us trying. I turned to face her, and the look in her eyes, hopeful, desperate, terrified, mirrored everything I felt. For a moment, we just stood there, the distance between us both infinite and non-existent. Then, without thinking, I closed the gap, my hand reaching for hers. Her fingers intertwined with mine, warm and steady, and for the first time all day, I felt like I could breathe. Okay, I said, my voice trembling but certain. Let's figure this out. Together. Riley's face broke into a smile, the kind that made my heart ache with how much I'd always loved it. But before we could say anything else, her phone buzzed on the coffee table, shattering the moment. She glanced at it, her expression shifting to something unreadable. It's my mom, she said, her voice tight. She's been weird about the move. I nodded, my stomach twisting. Riley's family was complicated. Her parents were strict, traditional, the kind who didn't know about the pride flags she'd hung in her dorm or the girlfriend she'd had sophomore year. I'd always been her safe space, the one she could be herself with. But now, with this new truth between us, I wondered how much harder it would be to navigate her world. She answered the call, her voice shifting to a careful, neutral tone. I busied myself with another box, trying to ignore the way my heart was still racing. As I taped it shut, I caught sight of a photo frame peeking out from under a pile of books. It was us, taken 2 summers ago at Coney Island, laughing under the boardwalk lights. I picked it up, my thumb brushing over Riley's smile, and I knew, no matter what happened next, there was no going back. Riley's voice was strained as she spoke into the phone, her usual confidence replaced by a guarded tone I rarely heard. Yeah, Mom, I'm almost unpacking, she said, pacing the small living room. I kept my eyes on the photo frame in my hands, the weight of our earlier confession still hanging heavy between us. I set the frame down carefully, as if it might break under the tension in the room. Riley's mom had always been a sore spot. She loved Riley, but her love came with expectations, rules, a vision of her daughter's life that didn't include the truth of who Riley was. I'd seen Riley shrink under that pressure before, carefully editing herself to avoid conflict. Now, as I watched her pace, I wondered how our new truth would fit into that equation. She hung up, exhaling sharply, and turned to me. Sorry about that, she said, forcing a smile. She's just being Mom. Is she okay with you moving to Chicago? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't want to talk about her mom. I wanted to talk about us, about what she'd said, what I'd admitted. But the moment felt fragile, like a bubble that might burst if we pushed too hard. Riley shrugged, tossing her phone onto the couch. She's not thrilled. Keeps saying I'm throwing away a stable life here. As if New York is stable. She laughed, but it was hollow and her eyes didn't meet mine. I wanted to reach for her, to pull her back to the moment we'd shared minutes ago, but doubt crept in. What were we doing? She was leaving in a week, starting a new job, a new life. And I was what? Supposed to confess my love and then wave goodbye at the airport? The thought made my chest ache. Riley, I started, my voice softer than I intended. What happens now? With us? She stopped pacing, her eyes locking onto mine. For a moment, she looked as lost as I felt, but then she crossed the room in 3 quick strides and took my hands. I don't know, she said, her voice raw. But I meant what I said. I'm not running from this anymore. I want you, us, in my life, no matter what. Her words sent a shiver through me, equal parts hope and fear. I wanted to believe her, to believe we could figure this out, but the reality of her move loomed large. You're going to be in Chicago, I said, my voice breaking. That's 1,000 miles away. How do we make this work? She squeezed my hands, her thumb brushing over my knuckles. We'll figure it out, she said, her voice fierce with determination. Phone calls, visits, whatever it takes. I'm not losing you, Emma. I wanted to argue, to point out the logistics, the distance, the complications of her family and her new job. But her hands were warm, her eyes steady, and for the first time, I let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, we could make this work. Okay, I said, nodding. But we need to be honest. No more hiding, no more pretending. Deal, she said, a small smile breaking through. No more hiding. We stood there, hands clasped, the chaos of the move forgotten for a moment. But reality wasn't done with us. The doorbell buzzed, sharp and insistent, and Riley flinched, dropping my hands. That's probably the movers, she said, her voice shifting back to practical. They're picking up the first batch of boxes. I nodded, stepping back as she went to answer the door. Two guys in worn jeans and company polo shirts stepped inside, their presence filling the small apartment with a new kind of energy. They started hauling boxes to the truck, and Riley threw herself into directing them, her confidence returning like a mask slipping back into place. I watched her, my heart still racing from our conversation. I wanted to freeze this moment, to hold on to the fragile hope we'd built, but the movers' voices and the scrape of boxes against the floor pulled me back to the present. This was real. Riley was leaving, and we were stepping into something new, something uncharted. As the movers worked, I helped Riley sort through the last of her kitchen supplies, our hands brushing as we packed dishes into a box. Each touch felt electric, a reminder of what we'd admitted. But there was no time to dwell on it. The movers were quick, and soon the apartment looked emptier, like a shell of the life Riley had built here. Hey, Riley said, catching my eye as we taped up the last kitchen box. Want to take a break? There's a coffee shop down the street. We could talk. I nodded, grateful for the chance to step away from the chaos. We slipped out of the apartment, leaving the movers to finish, and walked to the corner cafe, a place we'd been to 100 times. The familiarity of it, the chipped mugs, the smell of roasted beans, felt like a lifeline. We sat in a corner booth, our knees brushing under the table. Riley ordered her usual black coffee, and I got a latte, the routine grounding us. But the air between us was different now, charged with the weight of our confessions. So, I said, stirring my coffee to avoid her gaze. How do we do this? You're leaving in a week. Riley leaned forward, her hands wrapped around her mug. I've been thinking about that, she said. I want you to come with me. Not, like, right now, but maybe. Eventually. If you want. My heart skipped. Move to Chicago? The idea was overwhelming, exhilarating, terrifying. My life was here, my job at the bookstore, my tiny apartment in Queens, my routine. But Riley was my anchor, and the thought of her leaving without me felt like losing a piece of myself. I know it's a lot, she said quickly, reading my expression. I'm not saying you have to decide now. Just think about it. Okay. I nodded, my mind racing. Chicago. A new city, a new start. With Riley. The idea was intoxicating, but it came with 1,000 questions about my job, my family, her family, and the life we'd be stepping into. As we sipped our coffee, the conversation shifted to lighter things, memories of college, stupid pranks we'd pulled, the time we got lost in Central Park at midnight. But beneath it all, the unspoken question lingered. Could we really do this? Could we turn our friendship into something more, across cities, across the complications of our lives? By the time we returned to the apartment, the movers were gone, and the space felt even emptier. Riley closed the door behind us, and for a moment, we just stood there, looking at the bare walls. She said softly, turning to me. No matter what happens, I'm glad I told you. I smiled, my heart aching with how much I loved her. Me too. The apartment was nearly empty now, just a few stray boxes and a folding chair in the corner. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of traffic outside. Riley and I stood in the middle of the living room, the weight of our earlier conversation settling like dust over the bare space. I glanced at her, and she was staring at the floor, her hands shoved in her pockets. The confidence she'd shown at the coffee shop was gone, replaced by something quieter, more uncertain. I wanted to reach for her, to bridge the gap between us, but my own fears held me back. What were we doing? Was this real, or just a fleeting moment born from the chaos of her move? "Riley," I said, breaking the silence. "Are you sure about this? About us?" Her head snapped up, her eyes meeting mine with a fierceness that caught me off guard. "I've never been more sure of anything," she said, her voice steady despite the vulnerability in her expression. "Emma, I've spent years pretending I didn't feel this way. I'm not going back to that." Her words hit me hard, stirring up a storm of emotions I'd buried for too long. I thought of all the moments I'd dismissed, the way my heart raced when she hugged me, the nights I'd lain awake wondering what it would be like to kiss her. I'd told myself it was impossible, that Riley was too vibrant, too untouchable, to feel the same. But now, standing here, I realized I'd been wrong. "Okay," I said, my voice trembling. "Then let's do this. For real." A slow smile spread across her face, and before I could overthink it, she closed the distance between us, pulling me into a hug. Her arms were warm, familiar, but there was something new in the way she held me tighter, like she was afraid I'd slip away. I buried my face in her shoulder, breathing in the citrus scent of her hair, and for a moment, the world felt right. But reality wasn't done with us. Her phone buzzed again, and she groaned, pulling back to check it. "It's my sister," she said, her tone shifting to frustration. "She's coming by tomorrow to help with the last of the stuff." I nodded, my stomach tightening. Riley's sister, Claire, was the opposite of her parents, open-minded, supportive, the one who'd cheered when Riley came out in college. But even Claire didn't know about us, about this new, fragile thing we were building. The thought of facing her, of explaining this, felt like stepping into a spotlight I wasn't ready for. "Do you want me to be here tomorrow?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "I mean, I can help with the final packing." Riley hesitated, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't read. "You don't have to," she said. "It might be weird. With Claire here." Her words stung, though I knew she didn't mean them to. "Weird how?" I asked, crossing my arms. "You just said you're done hiding." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I know. It's not about hiding. It's just Claire's great, but she's nosy. She'll ask a million questions, and I'm not sure I'm ready to explain this yet. Not when we're still figuring it out." I wanted to argue, to say we shouldn't have to hide anything, but I saw the exhaustion in her eyes. The move, her family, our confession, it was a lot, and I didn't want to push her too far, too fast. "Okay," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll give you space tomorrow. But I'm not going anywhere, Riley. Not from this." Her shoulders relaxed, and she reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you," she whispered. "I just need a little time." We spent the rest of the evening packing the last of her things, working in a quiet rhythm that felt both familiar and new. Every glance, every brush of her hand against mine, carried a weight it hadn't before. By the time we finished, the apartment was a ghost of itself, and I felt a pang of loss for the life we'd shared here. As I left that night, Riley walked me to the door, her hand lingering on my arm. She said, her voice soft. "Can I see you tomorrow night? After Claire leaves?" I nodded, my heart swelling. "Yeah, text me." She smiled, and for a moment, I thought she might kiss me. But she just squeezed my arm and stepped back, letting me go. I walked home through the chilly Brooklyn streets, my mind racing with possibilities. Riley loved me. She wanted this, us. But the shadow of her move, her family, the distance, loomed large. The next day, I tried to focus on work, shelving books at the bookstore and helping customers, but my thoughts kept drifting to Riley. I imagined her with Claire, packing the last boxes, laughing over old memories. I wondered if she'd mention me, if she'd hint at what we'd confessed. The thought made my stomach flip, equal parts hope and nerves. When Riley texted me that evening, my heart leapt. "Claire's gone. Want to come over?" I grabbed my jacket and headed back to her place, my steps quick with anticipation. When I arrived, the apartment was nearly bare, just a sleeping bag on the floor and a single lamp casting a warm glow. Riley was sitting on the sleeping bag, a bottle of wine and 2 plastic cups beside her. "Thought we could have a last night here," she said, her smile shy. "Just us." I sat beside her, our knees touching, and she poured the wine. We clinked cups, the plastic crinkling, and laughed at the absurdity of it. For a while, we talked about nothing: movies, music, the time we tried to bake cookies, and set off the fire alarm. But the air between us was charged, and I knew we couldn't avoid the bigger conversation forever. "Riley," I said, setting my cup down. "What did you tell Claire about us?" She hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the sleeping bag. "I didn't tell her everything," she admitted. "I said you were helping me move, that we're close. But I couldn't go into it yet." Disappointment flickered through me, but I pushed it down. "Okay," I said. "But you're gonna have to tell her eventually. And your parents." "I know," she said, her voice small. "I will. I just need to figure out how." I reached for her hand, intertwining our fingers. "We'll figure it out together," I said, echoing her words from yesterday. "No matter what." She looked at me, her eyes shining with gratitude and something deeper. Then, slowly, she leaned in, and my breath caught as her lips brushed mine. The kiss was soft, tentative, but it felt like a promise of something real, something worth fighting for. The kiss lingered, soft and warm, like a spark catching fire. Riley's hand cupped my cheek, her thumb brushing gently against my skin, and for a moment, the world outside her empty apartment ceased to exist. When we pulled apart, her eyes were wide, searching mine, as if she was as surprised as I was by what we'd just done. "Was that okay?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and fear. I nodded, my heart pounding so hard I could barely speak. "More than okay," I managed, a smile breaking through. Her face lit up and she laughed, a sound that felt like sunlight after a storm. We sat there on the sleeping bag, the single lamp casting long shadows across the bare walls. The wine was forgotten, the plastic cups tipped over in our haste. Riley's hand stayed in mine, her fingers tracing small circles on my palm, and I felt like I was floating, caught in a moment too perfect to be real. But reality was never far away. The weight of her move, the distance, her family, it all hovered at the edges of my mind. I wanted to stay in this bubble forever, but I knew we had to face what came next. "Riley," I said, my voice soft but steady. "What happens when you leave?" "Really?" She sighed, leaning back against the wall, her hand still holding mine. "I've been asking myself that all day," she admitted. "I want us, so badly. But I also know I can't just stay. The job in Chicago, it's a big deal. It's what I've been working toward for years." I nodded, my chest tightening. I'd always known Riley was ambitious, driven in a way I admired, but could never match. She'd landed a marketing job at a tech startup, a step up from the freelance gigs she'd been piecing together in New York. I was proud of her, but the thought of her building a new life without me felt like a knife twisting in my gut. "I don't want to hold you back," I said, forcing the words out. "You deserve this. But I'm scared, Riley. Scared we'll try this and it'll fall apart because of the distance." She turned to me, her eyes fierce. "I'm scared too," she said. "But I'd rather try and fail than not try at all. I've spent too long pretending I don't love you, Emma. I'm not doing that anymore." Her words hit me like a wave, washing away some of my doubt. I leaned in, kissing her again, this time with more confidence, more certainty. Her lips were soft, her hands pulling me closer, and for a moment, I let myself believe we could do this, that love could bridge 1,000 miles. When we pulled apart, Riley rested her forehead against mine, her breath warm against my cheek. "I have an idea," she said, her voice tentative. What if you came to visit me in Chicago? Just for a weekend. See what it's like. See if we can make it work." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. I'd never been to Chicago, never imagined leaving New York for anything more than a vacation. But the thought of being with Riley, of exploring a new city with her, made my heart race. "I'd like that," I said, smiling. "But what about your family? If we're doing this, they're gonna find out eventually." Riley's expression darkened, and she pulled back slightly, her hands dropping to her lap. "Yeah," she said quietly. "That's the hard part." I knew her parents were a minefield. They'd never accepted her bisexuality, brushing it off as a phase, a college experiment. Riley had learned to keep that part of herself hidden from them, but it weighed on her. I'd seen it in the way she tensed when her mom called, the way she carefully curated her stories to avoid questions. "I'll tell them," she said, her voice resolute. "Not right away, but I will. I need to be ready. And I need to know we're solid first." I nodded, understanding, but still uneasy. "Okay," I said. "But I'm not going to be your secret, Riley. I want this to be real." "It is real," she said, her voice fierce. She took my hand again, squeezing it tightly. "I promise you, Emma. This is real." We spent the rest of the night talking, curled up on the sleeping bag, the lamp flickering as the bulb grew tired. We made plans, tentative, hopeful plans for me to visit Chicago, for her to come back to New York when she could. We talked about phone calls and video chats, about navigating the distance and the challenges ahead. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and for the first time, I felt like we were building something together. As the night grew late, Riley fell asleep with her head on my shoulder, her breathing soft and steady. I watched her, my heart swelling with love and fear and everything in between. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I wanted her in it no matter what. The next morning, we woke to the sound of her alarm, a harsh reminder that her flight was in 2 days. We spent the day tying up loose ends, returning keys to the landlord, donating the last of her furniture, saying goodbye to the apartment that had been our haven. Every moment felt bittersweet, a step closer to her leaving, but also a step closer to us. When it was time for me to go, Riley walked me to the door, her eyes red from lack of sleep, but bright with determination. "I'll call you when I land in Chicago," she said, pulling me into a hug. "And we'll figure this out." "I promise." I hugged her back, holding on a little longer than necessary. "I'm holding you to that," I said, my voice muffled against her shoulder. As I walked home, the city buzzing around me, I felt a strange mix of hope and uncertainty. Riley was leaving, but she wasn't gone, not yet, not ever, if we could make this work. I clung to that thought, letting it carry me through the ache of her absence. 2 days later, I got her text, "Landed in Chicago. Miss you already." I smiled, my heart aching but full, and typed back, "Miss you too. Call me tonight." And just like that, we began. The first week without Riley felt like waking up in a world slightly off-kilter. New York was the same, crowded subways, neon lights, the hum of life, but without her, it felt emptier, like a song missing its melody. I threw myself into work at the bookstore, shelving novels and recommending titles to distract myself from the ache in my chest. Riley called every night, her voice crackling through my phone from her new apartment in Chicago. "It's freezing here," she'd say, or "I found a coffee shop you'd love." We'd talk for hours about her new job, the quirky coworkers she was meeting, the way Lake Michigan looked at dusk. But beneath the small talk, there was always the undercurrent of us, our new, fragile love, stretching across the miles. One night, as we talked, I heard a hesitation in her voice. She said, her tone careful. "My parents want to visit next month. They're curious about my new life." My stomach twisted. "Are you going to tell them?" I asked, clutching the phone tighter. "About us." She was quiet for a moment, too long. "I want to," she said finally. "But I don't know how they'll react. I need to find the right time." I swallowed my frustration, knowing how hard this was for her. "Okay," I said. "But don't wait too long, Riley." I meant what I said. I'm not going to be a secret. "I know," she said, her voice soft. "I'm working on it." "I promise." The calls kept us connected, but they weren't enough. I missed her laugh, her touch, the way her eyes lit up when she teased me. So when she invited me to visit Chicago 2 weeks later, I didn't hesitate. I booked a flight, my heart racing with anticipation and nerves. This was it, our chance to see if this could work, if we could be more than late-night phone calls and texted heart emojis. When I landed in Chicago, Riley was waiting at the airport, her smile brighter than the city lights. She pulled me into a hug, and for the first time in weeks, I felt whole. "You're here," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm here," I said, holding her tight. The airport bustled around us, but for that moment, it was just us. Riley's new apartment was small but cozy, with a view of the city skyline that took my breath away. She'd already made it her own, books stacked haphazardly, a pride flag pinned to the wall, a candle burning with that familiar citrus scent. We spent the weekend exploring Chicago, wandering through Millennium Park, eating deep-dish pizza, laughing as we got lost in the loop. Every moment felt like a gift, a reminder of why I'd fallen for her. But there were moments of tension too. At a cafe one afternoon, Riley got a call from her mom, and I watched her face shift, her answers clipped and careful. When she hung up, I reached for her hand. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded, but her smile was strained. "She just keeps asking if I'm dating anyone." I didn't know what to say. I squeezed her hand, my heart sinking. "You don't have to tell her yet," I said, though the words felt heavy. "But we can't keep this in limbo forever." "I know," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "I'm gonna tell her. Soon. I need you with me when I do." The idea of facing her parents terrified me, but I nodded. "I'm with you," I said. "Always." That night, we lay on her couch, tangled together under a blanket, the city lights flickering outside. Riley kissed me, slow and deliberate, and I felt the weight of her promise in every touch. We were building something real, something worth fighting for, but the road ahead felt daunting. On my last day in Chicago, Riley took me to the lakefront, the wind sharp and cold against our faces. We stood by the water, her hand in mine, and she turned to me, her expression serious. She said, "I want you to move here. With me." My breath caught. I'd thought about it, dreamed about it, but hearing her say it made it real. "Riley, that's huge," I said, my mind racing. "My job, my apartment." "I know," she interrupted, her voice urgent. "I know it's a lot to ask. But I can't do this half-in, half-out thing. I want you here with me for real." I looked out at the lake, its surface rippling under the wind, and felt the weight of her words. Moving to Chicago meant leaving everything I knew, my job, my friends, my life. But it also meant a chance at something I'd wanted for years, a life with Riley. "I need to think about it," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my head. "But I'm not saying no." Her face lit up, and she pulled me into a kiss, the kind that made the world fade away. "That's enough for now," she whispered. When I flew back to New York, my heart was a tangle of hope and fear. I spent the next week wrestling with the decision, talking it over with my coworkers, my friends, myself. The bookstore job was steady but uninspiring. My apartment was cramped but familiar. Riley was the unknown, the risk, the reward. One night, as we talked on the phone, I made up my mind. "Riley," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna move to Chicago." She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Are you serious?" "Yeah," I said, smiling through my nerves. "I'm serious." We spent the rest of the call planning, when I'd move, how we'd make it work. It felt like stepping off a cliff, but with Riley waiting to catch me, I wasn't afraid. 3 months later, I stood in my own Chicago apartment, a small studio with a view of the same skyline I'd seen from Riley's place. The move had been chaotic, packing up my life, quitting my job, saying goodbye to New York, but standing here, with boxes still unpacked around me, I felt a strange sense of peace. I was here with Riley, and we were building something together. Our first few weeks as a couple in the same city were a whirlwind. We spent evenings cooking dinner in her tiny kitchen, laughing as we burned the pasta or danced to her favorite playlists. We explored the city, hand in hand, no longer afraid of who might see. But the shadow of her family still loomed, and I knew we couldn't avoid it forever. One Saturday, Riley's parents announced they were visiting. She'd been dreading it, her anxiety palpable as the day approached. "I'm gonna tell them," she said, her voice resolute but shaky. "About us. Today." I nodded, my stomach in knots. "I'm here," I said, squeezing her hand. "Whatever happens." Her parents arrived that afternoon, their voices filling her apartment with a tense energy. Her mom, Linda, was all smiles and hugs, but her dad, Tom, was quieter, his eyes scanning the space like he was looking for something to disapprove of. I stayed close to Riley, my presence a silent support as we made small talk over coffee. Finally, Riley took a deep breath and said, "Mom, Dad, there's something I need to tell you." Her voice was steady, but her hand trembled in mine under the table. "Emma and we're together. We're in love." The room went silent, the kind of silence that feels like it could shatter. Linda's smile faltered, and Tom's face hardened. "What do you mean, together?" he asked, his voice low. "I mean we're a couple," Riley said, her chin lifting. "I love her and she's moving here to be with me." Linda's eyes darted to me, then back to Riley. "Honey, are you sure? This is a big change." "I'm sure," Riley said, her voice fierce. "I've never been more sure." Tom stood, pacing the small living room. "Riley, we raised you better than this," he said, his words cutting like a blade. This isn't right." I felt Riley tense beside me, but she didn't back down. "It's right for me," she said. "And if you can't accept that, then you're not accepting me." The argument that followed was raw, painful, full of raised voices and tears. Linda tried to mediate, but Tom's disapproval hung heavy, his words echoing the fears Riley had carried for years. I stayed quiet, holding her hand, letting her fight her battle, but reminding her she wasn't alone. Finally, Tom stormed out, saying he needed time. Linda stayed, her eyes wet as she hugged Riley. "I just want you to be happy," she whispered. "I'll talk to your dad." After they left, Riley collapsed onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. I sat beside her, pulling her close. "I'm so proud of you," I said, my voice soft. "That was brave." She looked up, her eyes red but resolute. "It hurt," she admitted. "But it feels free. Like I can finally be me." We sat there for a long time, holding each other, the city humming outside. Her parents' reaction wasn't the end, it was just a step, one of many we'd take together. Over the next months, Linda came around, calling to check in, asking about me. Tom was slower, but he started texting Riley again, small steps toward understanding. Our life in Chicago grew roots. I found a job at a local library, and Riley thrived at her startup. We built a routine, morning coffee runs, late-night talks, stolen kisses in the park. There were challenges, the distance from my old life, the occasional tension with her family, but we faced them together, our love a steady anchor. One evening, as we walked along the lakefront, Riley stopped, pulling me close. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For taking this chance. For being here." I kissed her, the wind soft around us. "I'd do it all again," I said. "For you." And as we stood there, the city lights reflecting on the water, I knew we'd found something worth fighting for, a love that had started with a move, a confession, a risk, and had grown into a life. Our life. Together.